This is Contrazoom,
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Rachel Ho.
On today's show, we are continuing our A24 Retrospective. This is our 20th edition of the series. You can listen to episodes 224, A24 Retrospective, A Most Violent Year, 219, A24 Retrospective, The Captive, or go way back to 108, A History of A24 Films, to get the full backstory on the company. Today, we're looking at the first A24 film from 2015, Son of a Gun, directed by Julius Avery. The film stars Brenton Thwaites as JR, a young convict who ends up under the protection of armed robber Brendan, played by Ewan McGregor. On the outside world, JR teams up with Brendan to become a member of his armed robbery crew. JR ends up falling in love with Tasha, played by Alicia Vikander, who works for the crime boss that JR and Brendan are employed by. I want to welcome to the show, for the very first time, the Rear Admiral, the 5-star General, the Archbishop, Surgeon General, and Supreme Chancellor of Hot Takes, Simon Best, the other half of the Awesome Friday podcast. I had always assumed that you were just a contrarian chatbot that Matthew fired up to have a co-host, but now I know that you're a real person. So welcome to the show, Simon. How are you?
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I've been a fan of your show for a long time. And also, I'm looking forward to the soundtrack release because your opening theme is just very soothing. So whoever wrote that, please pass on my thanks. I'm good. I'm very, very good. I had a terrible day in work, and now I'm about to talk about film. So you're the thing I've been looking forward to today. So I'm really happy to be here. And no, I'm not a chatbot, a contrarian chatbot. I'm just English and a bit old and a bit tired, and I don't have much of a filter. So I don't really hold back. And as Matt says, he describes the way I talk about movies is really that I feel everything. And I either feel like everything's a 5-star or 1-star for me. There's very few times I'm in the middle because I'm a very sensitive person and I feel everything very strongly. So yes, I have opinions, and I used to be like, I studied film. I've done my stint as the kind of film bro you wouldn't really want to start talking to about films. And now I just really like watching Dungeons and Dragons. Have you seen Dungeons and Dragons? That's a great movie. Like I like my movies really immediate and direct these days. So I don't know. Matt's a lot more varied and balanced in his opinions, being the film nerd that he is. But it's great to be here.
I can't wait to find out if this was...
you for the first time, Dakota.
It is, yes. I can't wait to find out if this is a 1-star or a 5-star movie then by the end of our discussion. Rachel, you actually have a bit of an interesting past because you've guessed it numerous times on the Awesome Friday podcast to the point where you're now an official third member of the show. I don't really know. I can't keep up anymore. But for the longest time, it was just you and Matthew, and it took until, what was it, like your 7th or 8th appearance on the show before you finally had the three of you on together?
Well, yeah, because the reason I was on the show in the first place was because Simon was, I think you went home to England, didn't you? I think that's why. So like you were gone. And
I had to go home a few times, yeah.
Yeah, and so then that's why Matthew asked me to fill in. And then we finally, what was the episode that we did together? Oh, it was I think it was the top 10 of the year. Top 10 moments? I think it was like top moments or something like that. It was like a year wrap-up thing. Yeah, right. And that was the first time that that Simon and I actually got to record, even though I feel like we had like been connecting via Matthew.
Yes, he was the middleman, and it was very intimidating for me. Dakota, I'm sure you feel this as well. It's very intimidating for me because the Awesome Friday podcast is a very unfiltered, natural take on films. Like we're both massive film nerds, but we don't, like, I'm very impressed with all your organization. When we record, we basically choose two things and we hit the button, and what you hear is how Matt and I have talked together for over 10 years now, and is another reason why my wife never wants to be around us when we talk about film. So I don't consider myself to be the echelons of all you other guys who buy your Criterion collections and you watch all your things. Like my film watching time is so tiny these days that I don't consider myself to be part of that kind of level anymore. And so when I went away and I excitedly listened to Matt's friend who was taking over for me in the in the podcast, and I listened, I'm like, oh. And I'm just really happy for Matt that he's got actually a proper film person to speak to, because the poor guy has my shit to put up with every single week, and it was nice. It was nice for him to have a bit of film nerd fun, because it just sounded like the episodes you covered were just wonderful, and you've got a wonderful, as we've talked before, your radio voice is wonderful. So it's just really nice hearing the two of you talk very intelligently and so politely to each other. You're so polite. Matt and I don't have that problem. If we disagree, we disagree fully and often on air. But you two are just so like, oh, I disagree with you, but I understand your point. It's like, oh.
Yes,
you did say that. Yeah, I remember you brought that up. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I've heard
I
you guys
really like
say,
your guys' podcast.
I'm pretty sure I've heard you guys say to each other a few times, "No, you're wrong" on the show. Which I don't think Rachel and I have ever said to each
other. Matt and I are now at the point, like any committed relationship, where you can turn to the person that you're in the relationship with and go, "You're full of shit. Like, you're totally wrong, and here are the reasons why." And that's fine. That's just the way we are.
Yes. All right. Well, before we start, something I want the show to do kind of moving forward is a very, very brief recap when we complete a full year of A24 films. Since Rachel and I have now finished both 2013 and 2014 movie release years, you and I are both going to quickly name our top threes from each year, and in future episodes, we will probably give a little bit more time. But for now, let's just hear, what are your top three from the 2013 year, Rachel?
Yeah, I didn't like the 2013 year. I'll just say those movies sucked. But I went Spectacular Now, Bling Ring, and Ginger and Rosa.
Yeah, that's fair. There's only 5 movies, so if we did a top 5, it would just be all 5 of them. But mine in order are The Bling Ring, The Spectacular Now, and Spring Breakers, and Ginger and Rosa probably would have been the next one up. And then 2014, you have just missed one episode, The Captive, and that was when Matthew was on. But other than that, there were, how many? Let me count here. There were 11 movies that came out. What were your top 3 of the 10 you've seen?
Mine were super boring, but Enemy, Lock, Under the Skin.
We've got boring. 2 overlaps again, and mine is Most Violent Year, Under the Skin, and Enemy. So very close.
I thought of it, Most Violent Year, I considered putting that in because I hadn't seen it in a really long time. And then when we did the episode, I was like, oh, this is a really, really good movie. But I couldn't portray ScarJo like that.
I almost put in Tusk to make you angry.
This is the stupidest movie ever. But we don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that again.
All right, let's kick off this episode properly with our tradition of A24 4 questions. And Simon, since it is your first time on the show, I want to hear your answers. What were your, question number 1, I guess, is what are your top 3 A24 films?
I literally just got it to 3 like the second before I joined you today, because it's a very hard process to go through all of them. And we also have some crossover. So my top 3 A24 films are Enemy, The Lobster, and Midsummer.
Ooh,
yeah. You're speaking my language, group. Simon. That's, yep.
When I was going through, there's at one point I had a short list of 11, as I told you, and I know a movie hits home when I feel a little bit changed by it, when it's that emotionally it's hit that resonant bell, and you feel like you come out of that movie a different person than you went in. And it was really, really, really hard to discount things like The Green Knight, which I thought was just phenomenal. And obviously Everything Everywhere All at Once is a wonderful film too. But I love Jake Gyllenhaal. Let's just begin with that. And I don't mean on a like, oh, he's a nice guy. Like, I've met him. He's a total man crush of mine. And I'm not gay, but like totally I'm straight. But Jake Gyllenhaal is like, as an actor, I studied acting for a long, long time. So my major was in acting, and I taught theatre and film, and I acted in film for a while before I went into teaching ESL. So I'm always looking at like the same actor doing different things. And so I get a lot of pleasure from seeing actors just show the breadth of their ability, right? And in Enemy, you've got Jake Gyllenhaal playing two ends of a spectrum, and you have to keep reminding yourself that it's special effects, because he is so exceptional at showing us the dark and light and the introvert extrovert, and then that sort of crossover in the middle, and then this, of course, in this beautiful Denis Villeneuve soup of like perfect shots and perfect soundtracks and perfect editing, and then the ending, which I don't think anyone will ever see coming. And it just blew me away. Incredible film.
I just want to say that you, at the top, said that you didn't think that you spoke about films in like an intelligent way. And that was an incredibly great summary of why, one, Enemy is a great movie, and why, two, Jake Gyllenhaal is an exceptional actor. So, yeah, no, I don't know what you're talking about, that you can't talk about film intelligently.
Well, moving on, what was your introduction to A24 films?
I wish it had been Midsummer, actually, just to set the bar ridiculously high. But my introduction to A24 was in 2014. My son was born in 2011, and then my daughter was born in June 2014. So in April 2014, I was pretty exhausted that first couple of years, absolutely exhausted, and didn't have much free time. So I had a day off, and I went to watch a film that I hadn't heard of before. And so I sat in a dark cinema while my very pregnant wife was at home, which was fine. She knew I was there. And I watched Under the Skin in a dark cinema by myself. And I'd never seen anything like it at all. Under the Skin was almost in my top 3. It was the last one I took out. And I only took it out because I knew I was going to talk about it as my introduction. And obviously I'd seen Scarlett Johansson a lot before that point, but never in anything like this. And the publicity had been how a big part of the film is her going around Scotland in a van, picking up men, and it's real footage. Like, she went out and flirted with club goers and to get men into the van. And it just kind of shows that we're pretty, when it comes to Scarlett Johansson rolling up in a van asking you if you want to get in, we're pretty much up for it. Like, sure, no problem. And I think that's the main crux of that film, isn't it? Is that it's people being hunted through this beautiful, like, humanoid alien. But the filmmaking and the especially the scene on the beach with the baby, I don't think I've ever been that shocked in a film ever. And it really just kind of shocked me in a way that even horror movies don't shock me. And I think when we talk about what makes an A24 movie, and I thought a lot of different elements, but that kind of the horror of the moment, of specific moments, like Heredity's got that, Midsummer's definitely got that, the horror of these moments where you can't look away, where you're not allowed to look away. And just to really amplify it, I was by myself in a dark room. So you've got that horrible liminal space feeling of someone creeping up behind you anyway. And I keep coming back to that film when I think about films on a wider sense, and how it made me feel and how it was shot, and the brutality of horrific moments really, really got to me.
Well, it is a beautiful and dark movie, so I'm not surprised you had that experience, and that's probably a pretty good first pick to have, really, all things considered. But question number 3, what director, dead or alive, would make a good A24 film?
Okay, well, I'm going to embarrass myself now because my Thai pronunciation is pretty terrible. But in 2019, I covered the Vancouver Asian Film Fest, and I got a bunch of screeners and watched a lot of amazing things. And I watched a film called Where We Belong, which, without exaggeration, I have thought about at least once a month since I watched it in 2019. And it's about two girls who... one girl wants to go away to study English, and she's in the process of basically packing up her stuff to go and leaving her family, but she finds it difficult to leave her best friend. And so the movie is that process of her trying to say goodbye to her alive family, her dead family, her friendships, her life. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever watched in my life. And the direction of it just captures so much about humans and their choices and the choices we make and how they impact each other and how we have to live with them and how our next choice is always defined by our last. And the director is a Thai director. Now, excuse my pronunciation, but it's Kongdej Jataranasmi. I'm really sorry. If you have any listeners who know how to pronounce that properly, please find me and correct me. But the way this film is directed actually already feels like an A24 film in that it is a character study. It's a slow burn. It's all about interaction and giving the characters opportunity to grow and change and choose. And also has its kind of... there's a tiny element of magical realism as well that's really effective in there. And it really touched me, really, really touched me. And I think he would be an incredible director for an A24 project.
Well, looking at our listeners, less than 1% make up people from Thailand. So you're probably in safe hands that no one is going to write.
I'm happy to be corrected. I've learned from many years teaching people from all over the world that the English idea of how foreign names are pronounced is very different from how they're actually pronounced. So I don't know where we got that idea from, where we just thought we could pronounce it however we want. So I actually openly have always asked my students to correct me on my pronunciation of the name. So if anyone knows how to pronounce the director of Where We Belong from 2019, then please let me know.
Well, that I don't think is going to be a name that will ever be repeated in this question. I think that's pretty safe to say that you will have the most unique answer.
Yay.
And then the last question we have, and the most philosophical one, what makes an A24 film?
So I've touched on this a little bit already. I thought a lot about the idea of regret, like how there's so many of these films are either begin or end with regret, things you didn't do, or an arc where you think you want to do something and it doesn't work out. But then I thought more, and it's actually more about the choices we make, and that felt a lot more natural as a summary of all. I haven't seen all the A24 movies, but the ones I have that I keep getting drawn back to are about the humanity of the choices we make and how we are tied to them and how our choices affect other people and how they affect us, right? And we can't ever see where our choices are going to take us. And a lot of the arcs begin and end with choices that define us. And I think about choices a lot. I'm kind of a fatalist. I met the woman I married, I met by pure chance because I made a choice to go and meet another friend at a certain time, at a certain place, because I was already in town. I wouldn't have met them if I wasn't there. That one choice has defined my entire life from that point. And so I really like all the A24 films I've seen are really play into that idea of how our choices lead us down specific paths until we make a different choice to get off them.
Wow.
I am once again just going to call bullshit on the first thing that you said, that you cannot talk about films intelligently. I'm pretty sure Dakota and I just sound like idiots now in comparison to you. So
Oh, you don't, I guarantee you. Well, thank you.
That was a pretty incredible and very philosophical answer. Also, I don't think
beautiful
one that
answer.
we'll hear repeated. All right, well, let's get into this movie.
See yourself as a father figure, do you?
That's funny.
I found something you like. 4.5 million of gold.
Hey, you can do this.
What if I say no?
If one of them hits the panic button, then it's game over.
Nobody move! We just won the gold!
So, Son of a Gun was the debut feature film by Australian filmmaker Julius Avery after making a series of short films. He has since gone on to direct films such as 2022's Samaritan, starring Sylvester Stallone, and 2023's The Pope's Exorcist, starring Russell Crowe. In Son of a Gun, we meet JR, a 19-year-old who has just been sentenced to prison for 6 months for an unknown crime. He eventually requires protection as JR is targeted by 3 intense inmates. This protection comes at a cost once JR is out, and he'll be called upon to help Brendan from afar. This comes into play when he helps orchestrate a prison escape by hijacking a helicopter and having it land in the courtyard of the prison. Brendan's employer is Sam, who has a new job lined up for Brendan. They plan on robbing a gold factory, as the value of gold has gone up immensely while Brendan was in jail. JR meets and falls in love with Tasha, who is a former girlfriend of Sam's and works as a server at the strip club he owns. This complicates things, as Sam still has control over Tasha's life. After the robbery occurs, things, as usual in movies like this, go more south than Australia is on a map, as people begin turning on each other as the heat is turned up on all of them. You like that, didn't you? That little pun. Altitude Film Sales, which was handling the sale of the international rights, held a market screening at Cannes in 2014, and A24 and DirecTV scooped up the rights. At the same time, they also secured the rights for The Captive to have a VOD and theatrical release. The film was released in January 16th, 2015. This is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so if you have not watched the film, we suggest doing so first. This is now our second Australian crime thriller after The Rover that features an international cast with Scott Ewan McGregor and Swedish Alicia Vikander in a very early role for her, coming out just before Ex Machina did the same year, pushing her to stardom. Simon, I'd love to start with you in terms of how this comes at a still experimental era of A24 films when they're still trying to figure out what their market is. Do you think this film works in having established stars doing smaller films outside the Hollywood system, or does it just seem like it's too much of a copycat of other films of the same genre?
Well, that's a good question. The problem is, how do you make a heist movie? How do you make a crime movie without it being derivative at this point? And that's the difficulty, I think, is the characterizations and the script, and finding some way to circumvent expectations, because we've all seen these movies hundreds of times now. And to answer your first question, I am always interested in larger actors doing smaller roles. That said, I'm also interested in unknown actors doing large roles. I think we put far too much focus on actors as celebrities instead of the storytellers that they are, but that's a different discussion. I do think it is effective. What I found interesting here, the thing that I glad it focused on, was the growing relationship between JR and Brendan, in that Brendan being his kind of... JR's running away from his abusive father into the hands of another abusive father. And it's always interesting as a viewer to see that cycle coming round again and seeing again his choices being made. And I was really interested in how much time it gave us looking at his face, watching Brendan when he first got to prison, seeing very clearly in him that this was his end game, to get closer to the man that he kind of idolized. So I think it does work. I don't think it fully escapes its kind of derivative story roots. Nothing in this film shocked and surprised me, but it was still an interesting character study between the trio. And I liked how Alicia Vikander, who is a total star, you can see here actually that she's a total star. You wouldn't know this is her first major role. That sort of triangle between them and how they bounce off each other, I thought was quite effective.
Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I didn't really like this movie. I like Simon talking about how derivative the film, like nothing. I just found it really boring, and kind of to what your initial question was, Dakota, about like A24 still being in a bit of an experimental phase, and that like some of the I know I was a bit harsh on the 2013 movies, but at least those ones took even something like Spring Breakers, which I wasn't a big fan of, but at least it took like a shot at doing something different and trying to be interesting. I just feel like this movie, it's like it's not even trying to be interesting. It's just, I know nowadays we talk about like the AI generated, like you can get them to like write a script or something like that. Like I feel like this is something that an AI would just spit out because it's just so paint by numbers. And there are some interesting things. Like I do agree. Like I think the relationship between JR and Brendan is interesting. But it's just not enough to me to take away from the fact that it's kind of a dull movie. Yeah. And when it does, when the action kind of comes in, and it's not that interesting actually, like, and they kind of lost me by that point anyways. So yeah, just this one didn't really do it for me.
I liked it. I wouldn't say I love it, but I am a bit of a sucker for good crime dramas, crime thrillers. And this kind of fits nicely into the bucket where, yeah, it is derivative in the sense of like, you know what the plot points are going to be. And you could see when people start turning on each other, how it's all going to play out and who's going to die and who's going to live and all that sort of stuff. It was very much expected, as soon as things started going into motion. That said, I still thought it was still pretty interesting for the most part, as far as I was invested in the story. I thought the relationship between JR and Brendan was fascinating enough that I was into their characters and wanted to see where they were going to go. And then the actual heist and getaway and all that sort of stuff was shot quite well, and I was very much into it. And it's sort of funny. I was watching it, and basically once the robbery stuff started to happen, I realized, and so I messaged Rachel, I'm like, what part of the movie are you in? Because I didn't want to give anything away, but I was like, oh, this is basically just Australia's version of Heat.
No, yeah. You said this is like Aussie Heat, and I went, oh, I've never seen that movie before. And the movie's called Aussie Heat, and I was like, oh no, he means like an Australian version of Heat. Okay.
Yes, that did happen.
That was literally something that happened.
Aussie Heat sounds like a 90s straight-to-video Jean-Claude Van Damme, like, travel movie. I'd watch that. Completely
not a Dakota movie. So I'm like, what is this movie that he is talking about?
It was an early Russell Crowe movie, Aussie Heat. But I think this movie did a couple things very interesting, and it mostly had to do with its choice of editing, and more so the editing of the script rather than the movie itself, as far as what the movie decided to show us and what it didn't show us. Because there's a lot of points in this movie where, like, especially in the early prison stuff, where you're watching this, the interactions play out and you're like, okay, yeah, I know where this is going. Oh yeah, this guy is being assaulted by other inmates. Oh, and yeah, he's going to be next because he's also a scrawny guy. And oh, the protection comes in, all this sort of stuff. And it sort of seems very textbook. But then anytime, we expect something to happen, they just kind of cut and go to the next scene. And we're like, oh, okay, we obviously know what had actually happened. We don't need to see everything in full detail to understand these characters' motivations, what they're experiencing, where their heads are at each of these moments. And it kind of continues that a few different times throughout the movie, where it was basically just like, okay, and now we're on the next scene. And it's like, I didn't actually need to see all that filler. So I sort of appreciate Julius Avery deciding, who also wrote the script himself too, to be like, hey, I don't need to show you everything. You as a viewer are going to understand and know how to fill in the gaps. Was that something you at least appreciate it, Rachel, or were you just kind of not on board with anything at all?
No, I appreciated that. I noticed that primarily in the earlier scenes in the prison when, like you said, when you kind of assume like a rape scene is going to come or something like that. And I personally don't think we ever need to see rape in film. That's just my own opinion. But yeah, I appreciate that they never quite show it. And in fact, I think when you're talking about especially sexual violence, I think when you don't show it, it's much more impactful because it just leaves your memory. Oh, that's dark. Not your memory, your brain. That was really dark.
So
it leaves your, like, I don't even want to say imagination. That's kind of gross too, but it just leaves it to you to fill in the gaps, like you said. And that can be, 10 times more heinous than what they ever could have put on screen. So I did appreciate that in the sense of, I just didn't want to have to see that. But I do think, as much as the film didn't work for me, I think that the filmmaking behind it, I actually think is pretty good. Like, you've pointed it out already, but, he's very restrained in the way that he made the film. Like, he could have gone full like for a movie like this, you can go really, really full action, heat, if you will. But he kind of held back a little bit. And I appreciate that, from Avery to do that, because sometimes, like, it's kind of what we talked about with A Most Violent Year. And that's a very, very restrained movie and a completely different to this one. But it has that, a bit more subtlety than I suppose you would expect from it. So I won't say like I completely hated it. It's not like a movie that I will, like, I kind of already forget a lot of it, to be honest. And I just watched it a few hours ago. So to me, it's just not a very memorable film. Like, there's tons that you could watch in place of this one, but that's not to say that this is a poorly made film.
Can I ask you a question, both of you? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm curious. Did you buy Ewan McGregor as a bad person, or is he just too adorable? Like, did you do you find him believable? Because I kind of had the same problem in Birds of Prey, where he's the antagonist as well, and he does some terrible things in that movie. But I've just watched like so many of his documentaries where he bikes around the world with his best mate, and he's just absolutely adorable. And he's also Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it's really hard for me to see him. Or maybe it's his acting dynamic as well. I'm not sure I bought him fully as a dangerous person. Did you at all?
I did. I haven't seen those documentaries. I've heard they're really good though. But
they're really good.
I do really like. I've watched many of his interviews and things like that, and he is seems like a very nice dude. But generally, no, I don't have a problem buying him as a baddie in a film. I think he's a good enough actor that he can get beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this. I won't say I'm not a Ewan McGregor fan, but I will say that for the most part, I don't think he chooses projects that usually interest me. So more often than not, I haven't watched a lot of his stuff. Like I've obviously seen him in Star Wars and stuff like that. And I know he's a very talented actor. So that said, I feel like I have less of a preconceived notion of what a Ewan McGregor performance is. But I think this movie does a couple things very interesting to sort of set him apart, because he's not very physically imposing, especially when you put him in a prison where, you're rounding out all the background performers of, big burly tattoo biker looking dudes, skinhead racist type of people. And so obviously actors for the most part are pretty diminutive, and he's not the tallest guy obviously in this film. And so they set him up, interestingly enough, where, they show him playing chess a few times. He always has a book. Things that are not usually your typical, prison behavior that we see as sort of the template in movies. He's not the guy that's boxing. He's not, hitting the gym. He's not constantly getting in fights, things like this. But he's surrounded with a couple muscle guys. And I think because they sort of introduce him as a more of an intellectual criminal rather than just a brute compared to the other people in the prison system, we have a bit of a different expectation of who he is. And so the first time that we actually do see him act upon violence, he's kind of following the charge of his two heavies, where they're the ones that are initiating the fight, and then he kind of comes in after a guy's gotten punched a couple times, and then he throws his punch, and he does that a little bit. So we're not really expecting him to be the big tough bad guy. We're expecting him to be the smart bad guy, and I think that sort of continues once we get him outside of prison. Yeah, he's good with a gun. He's very intelligent. He's a leader. People follow him, all this sort of stuff that's going on. And so I think that the movie specifically sets him up to not have to be the quote unquote tough bad guy, which I think works in his favor.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
But overall, I was quite impressed with his performance there. And I think the highlight is the relationship dynamic between Ewan McGregor and Brenton Thwaites, who plays JR, and this sort of like young man who is yearning for a father figure in his life, and this guy who doesn't really want to be a father figure but sort of ends up becoming one, and as Simon, you pointed out, is also just as abusive towards his makeshift son as this kid's real father was to him. We don't get a ton of backstory about that, but he obviously comes from some sort of a broken home. But I think the dynamic between the two of them is the best part of the movie for me, and one that I was really invested in. And Simon, it seems like you kind of were too, or at least you enjoyed the relationship aspect between the two of them.
Yeah, I really agree with both of you. Actually, I did find parts of it a little unfulfilling. The escape from the heist gone wrong was the most interesting part of the film. I thought it was really well shot as well. I really like a good car chase, and it was pretty great. And I really like Ewan McGregor as an actor, and it's really interesting. You talk about him being the more of a darker mentally person than a physical person, which I think is a really interesting angle on his character. And the idolization of JR looking up to him and just following him, even at the detriment of his own like freedom and relationship with Tasha as well, was the most interesting part of the film for me too. Yeah.
Did you believe Ewan McGregor as sort of the bad guy? I'll turn that question on to you.
I did. I think what I was expecting was a little bit of a Ryan Gosling in the elevator and Drive moment. So in Drive, Ryan Gosling is restrained all the way through, and like you can tell he's dark, but he's more restrained. And then he has that one moment in the elevator where he reveals who he really is. And I was perhaps expecting Ewan McGregor to have more of a explosive moment to show how the darkness that he actually is. I don't think I bought him totally, especially in the prison at the beginning. I don't think I bought him as the kind of person that would have that kind of influence inside that prison enough to stave off a whole like group of heavies trying to rough up his like new member. But he is a good enough actor to make it work. I'm not sure I was 100% convinced, but I do really enjoy watching him as an actor. I do think he's got interesting range.
Interesting. Okay. For me, I personally found the Alicia Vikander character to be the biggest distraction for me. I really could not care about the love entanglement between JR and Tasha, and felt it pretty much weighed down the whole movie. Yeah, it kind of comes to a nice conclusion at the very end of it, but it's a conclusion that I didn't care about the lead up to. Now you were alluding that this was kind of, you know, a nice star-making turn for her there, Simon, and that you could tell of things to come for her. But for me, the whole character just really did not work. And, you know, her doing this like weird Russian accent thing, it just was something that did not sit well with me. And I don't know what it was. I think for the most part, it was just, as Rachel's kind of describing this movie as being a little derivative, I felt her character was probably the most derivative of being the, you know, bad boy's girlfriend who wants to get out but can't get out sort of thing that we've seen a million times and done far better in many other things. So I'm sort of curious about like what sort of sparks you maybe have saw from her in this that I might have missed.
It's interesting because she was one of the highlights of the film for me, and you're totally right. I mean, all the story beats have been done in a number of better movies, and her character is no exception to that. I just find her screen presence really interesting, and there are many accents, good and bad, in different parts of Russia. So that's how I'm gonna just pass that over as like, yeah, she's from that part of Russia where they sound like that. But I've always loved watching her in film. I think she's got an incredible presence and focus, and that whole thing about screen presence is so hard to define and so hard to sort of create if you don't have it. And I think she has got that focus. And I actually really enjoyed the complication that she introduced to JR as he's trying to follow his new father figure whilst also be like the hero, be Batman to this poor girl trapped in this crime circle. And for me, it balanced out that triangle nicely. I didn't find her a distraction. Derivative, yes, but I like the function her character had in the film, and I really enjoy her performance as an actor generally.
Nice. What about you, Rachel?
I fall somewhere probably in the middle of you two. Like, I think I really like Alicia Vikander as well as an actress. I think that I don't know if I've ever seen her in something that I don't think she's good in. I'm trying to think if there's anything I've ever seen her in that I'm like, you're not good. I think she's always very good. And I completely agree about the screen presence. I think that she's just one of those people that has the it factor. Like, you see her on screen and your eyes are just kind of drawn to her. Mm-hmm. But saying that, her character is written appallingly poorly. Like, it's that very typical, we need a lady in this, and so let's make her like kind of vulnerable but also kind of badass, super sexy, and and she's just kind of there, and like she does play a part in the eventual conclusion of the film, but she's, and I didn't buy the kind of the love story between her and JR either. That might have been a bit to do with, I just don't think, well, one, it was very rushed, but I don't think that like we had enough time to really build any chemistry between the two of them. So yeah, to me, it's a very thinly written character. And we've seen the female character in these types of movies get written like that all the time. I think the reason that we notice it a little bit more in this one is because it ends up being Alicia Vikander in that role, where typically speaking, and I mean, actually in the time when they made this, they just got some random actress. Right. But now looking back, she's a big deal. So it kind of turns our attention a little bit more to it. But I think it's just, to me, it's just like very typically, that's the kind of role that females tend to get in those types of movies, especially back then. Like, and I say back then, like it was a long time ago, but I mean, actually we're talking like what, nearly 10 years ago now. So like there's enough time in there for film to have changed. And certainly, the world around us changed quite a bit since 2015. So yeah, I guess this movie would have been made in 2014, really. But yeah, so I fall somewhere in between the two of you. I don't think she's a distraction, but I think the character sucks. But at the same time, I'm not surprised at all that the character sucks.
Yeah, this had come out a few years after two movies I had actually already seen her in. She was in a great, I believe it was a Norwegian film called A Royal Affair. With Mads Mikkelsen, actually. And then she was also in Anna Karenina, which is a movie I absolutely adore that for some reason a lot of people just did not care for. Joe Wright's film adaptation of it. And I love how theatrical that movie is. And both of those movies had standout performances from her. Obviously, one in Royal Affair, she was the lead, and Anna Karenina, she has a pretty small part in it. But she was as both of you have alluded to numerous times, she has quite the screen presence, and it is no shock that she shows up on screen and instantly we can believe that the main character falls in love with her right away. Rachel, is there anything you kind of want to lead the discussion towards?
Not really. I just really didn't like this movie that much. I just watched it and I thought, yeah, it's fine. Like it's one of those movies that it's for me difficult to talk about and like difficult to critique in a sense because I'm so aggressively indifferent to it. Like I can see why people are interested in it and why it might be of interest to someone. Like I kind of get the good points of it, but overall I'm like, it's not horrible and it's not great. And so it just kind of falls in this weird gray area where you ask me about it next week and I probably will forget that I've seen it. It is surprising though that they did get, I mean, again, Alicia Vikander is now a big name, but back then she wasn't. But I do appreciate, like, you know, Simon, you said, you know, when you see bigger actors in smaller films and the vice versa, that is true as well. Like I always like that Ewan McGregor is one of those actors that does, similar to Jake Gyllenhaal, actually, who we were just talking about, like they do the big stuff, but they also do the little things as well. And and I fall into that kind of really weird, boring spot where I just don't find the movie exciting to talk about one way or the other.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it was rushed. There's lots of moments in this film that could have been more interesting character moments if they'd given it a bit more time to develop on it. Like when they discover one of their 3 escapists is actually a child rapist, and then they just shoot him and move on. Like it's just dealt with and moved on. And at the beginning, the prison scene ends with that. As soon as he's taken in by Ewan McGregor's gang, there's a big time jump and he's out of prison. It's done. Like there's no more development of how. Like we've seen the before. It might have been nice to see a bit more of the after as well and see that develop a bit more. But you can't have everything in a film with obviously a budget limitations and runtime limitations. But I think there's quite a few moments where they could have given the characters a bit more.
I suppose maybe that's kind of where the problem lies a little bit, is that it doesn't. I feel like with action movies, you either go full tilt, super action, so something like a John Wick where it's just a lot going on, and or like any number of the 90s action movies and 80s action movies, like it's a lot. Or you go the other side, which is action, but the focal point is it's more character study and it's a lot more cerebral and subdued and things like that. But I feel like this movie, kind of what you were saying, Science, like you can't do everything, but I feel like this movie did try to do everything. And because they didn't pick a side, because they said, like, we're going to have a little bit of character development, we're going to do a little bit of, like, cool action scenes, you don't end up excelling at one. So you end up kind of falling flat on both. And maybe that's where it kind of doesn't work for me.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that time jump there. And the way I look at it is, so we get this scene of Ewan McGregor offers protection to this young man in exchange for, once they're on the outside, he will have to do something in return, which, you know, is a very typical, we understand how this scenario goes. And we get this basically a tacit agreement in place of, like, yes, he will accept his protection in prison. And so then we get the time jump and it's out of prison and it's his life now starting outwards. What can we reasonably expect if we were to sort of fill in the blanks of what those scenes would have looked like? It would have been pretty much what we would already know of. We don't need to see it in the sense of, like, it would be him joining his group. He would probably be playing chess with Ewan McGregor because they have an equal interest in that. He would have, you know, just been, I don't know, just forming some sort of a bond. And I don't think we needed to see that to understand that it took place, because once we get to the outside, he not only, you know, has this bond already where he has an attachment for Ewan McGregor, but also for the third gang member, the one that is not the child rapist who stays with them. When he eventually dies in the robbery sequence, he feels a profound sadness, which, you know, clearly shows that they had a bond when they were in prison that, yes, we didn't really get to see, but do we really need to see it to understand that it probably had happened? I argue that we don't need to have seen any of those scenes after he agrees to have Ewan McGregor's protection.
You know, I would have just taken one Really? So
Yeah.
we see the fight in the prison where he throws him over the rail and the main bad guy dies very, very horribly. And then we understand he's protected and you get the time jump. I think I would have liked a few, maybe even just one scene after that to see the remaining gang, to see the difference in their body language around JR when he walks through the shower, when he walks through anymore. Like the aura he gives out now as a protected person is going to be different than before. And I think I would have enjoyed, because it would have cemented his bond with Brendan a bit more as well. Like we would have been given a bit more evidence to show that he really would do anything for his new like father figure, who he clearly idolizes to begin with, just to show the Brendan effect. And later on, the guy who escapes with them, who sticks with them, says, if you follow Brendan, he'll lead you to the pot of gold. And that kind of effect in the prison after the fight, where he is a safe person moving through the prison and seeing these huge bulking guys who almost tried to rape him now moving away from him as he moved through the prison. I think it might have benefited from that. I do see your point totally. It needed to get to the main part of the story isn't his prison experience, so it needed to get to that. But I think I might have added just one scene afterwards.
Fair enough. Yeah, I understand that. I kind of want to get on to our game section, but do either of you have any last sort of talking points you want us to discuss?
Good.
No, yeah, I have nothing more really to say about that film, and that's the most damning thing. When I was thinking about how I'd rate it, I talked earlier about everything's a 5 or a 1 for me. This is kind of a 3 in the middle, and for me, coming from me, that's almost like the worst score you can get, because it's fine. It's not terrible. It doesn't make me angry. It's not amazing. It's just fine, and I'm likely to never really think about it again, which is unfortunate.
Isn't it funny though? Like, I would rather take a movie, like if I made a movie, I would rather have somebody like hate my movie than just feel nothing about it. Like, I'd rather someone like write the most like terrible review or like say the most vicious things about it rather than just be like, yes, it's whatever. Like, it's not memorable. It's not whatever. Like, I will always remember the really shitty movies that I've seen, and like, for better or for worse, right? Like, you'll remember, and it's an interesting discussion to have with people about it. Whereas movies like this, they just kind of, they're just kind of gray and they're just bleh. My official review. They're bleh.
Blah.
Bleh.
It's funny. I would call this movie, like, if you're a fan of crime thrillers, like this is very much like a quote unquote dad movie sort of thing, where like if you want to see some action sort of stuff, it's an easy recommend. But it's not one that I'm gonna make my top list or whatever when we do our year-end countdown. And I would probably only give it like a 3.5 out of 5, but I still feel stronger than Simon about this movie.
Yeah, but that's not saying much, though, is it? Like,
you got
Simon,
that whole
you're just kind of
0.5.
like, yeah, take it or leave it, whatever. Like, if you have just an opinion about it, then you've already kind of cleared the bar, or our bar, anyways, of that. So.
Yeah. Like, my summary of my review is, you've definitely seen this movie before, but Ewan McGregor is pretty solid in the movie, and the action I found interesting enough. And so for that, it's, a solid
interesting enough. What a glowing endorsement for action sequences. It's interesting enough. It's fine.
And unlike Matthew, we allow half scores on this show.
Yeah,
controversial.
We
wow.
We don't really do scores, but we do.
No, we don't.
Good for you.
we never assign scores to any movie we review here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's even better.
Yes. We're real movie critics. We don't assign scores because art is subjective.
Yeah, scores are reductive. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Take that, Matthew. I know you're listening to this. I'm sorry. Please don't be mad at me. All right, let us move on, and we're going to play our games. So we do 2 games every time we do an A24 retrospective series, and that is make a double bill pairing, and the only rule for that is it cannot be another A24 film, and we have a would you rather question where basically just has to be either good, negative, whatever you want, as long as it makes us think about it in some way or another. So we're going to start things off with our double bill pairings, and Simon, as our guest of honor, I would love to hear what movie would you pair with Son of a Gun?
Oh, I wish you had cameras on because I want you to see the smile on my face, because the perfect movie to pair with Son of a Gun, which is about one person going to another person and then a heist going wrong, and it has quite a good escape section. Well, this movie really expands on that. This is Michael Bay's drone shot kinetic masterpiece, Ambulance, capital L, capital A. Which is a masterpiece of action filmmaking. And we mentioned that Son of the Gun has a good escape sequence. This is one long escape sequence. And my boy Jake is in it again. And you have someone looking up to him as a brother this time, one last heist, and it goes horribly wrong. And all they've got to do is keep moving. This truck don't stop. If I watched it this afternoon just to remind myself of how amazing it is. And whereas Ewan McGregor I didn't quite buy as like a dark character, Jake Gyllenhaal can do dreamy, like lovely boyfriend, and he can do dark. Like I buy Jake Gyllenhaal being dark. He is unhinged in this film and hilarious. Turns out when you rewatch Ambulance, you realize it's actually a comedy. He is funny in this film.
He's hilarious. Yes, he is.
And it is like the feeling of excitement when you go on a first date. You know, that kind of buzzing you get in your skin. You know, when your skin kind of feels a bit electric and you're about to walk in. That's the feeling of watching Ambulance. Every frame in that movie is moving forward, is energy, and it is tied in with the performances, which are amazing because they know exactly what kind of film this is and they are committed to it 100%. And you've got Michael Bay deciding to hire like these young drone racers to fly his expensive cameras and giving them one take to do everything and them nailing it. And it is just, and it's funny, like I said. So you've got all the elements of Son of a Gun, but amplified up to like the perfect action escape movie. And it sticks the landing beautifully. It looks gorgeous. And I love it when, like, I'm a big fan of Roland Emmerich and Michael Bay when they get to do the thing they love, which is big movies, like big, like self-funded movies where no one tells them what to do. That's cinema. That's art for me. So I think it's the perfect pairing because you got the same themes, but it's better.
I love Ambulance. Did you know that about me, Simon? I really love Ambulance. Like I love that movie.
I didn't know that.
I love that movie. Like I genuinely love that movie so much. And like I get people to watch it and they're like, "This is stupid." I'm like, "You're stupid." It's a great movie.
You shouldn't be friends with those people any longer. Like that's a litmus test. That's a friendship litmus test. Like watch this movie and just tell me what you think. And if they're like, "Oh, this movie is stupid," like, look, this friendship isn't gonna. I can tell you now, this friendship isn't gonna work. So just collect your things and leave.
Well, I'll say it was my brother, and I don't really have much to say in that relationship. So I can't really be like, we're no longer friends. That doesn't really work with him.
There's a reason why I haven't watched it yet is because I don't want Rachel to call me an idiot and no longer be my co-host.
Oh, you'll love it. I can tell.
He won't. I can guarantee you he will not like it.
Rachel, what is your double bill pairing?
I think when we first started doing these A24 episodes, I used to think really, really hard about like, okay, what movie would go like so perfectly well with this? But then I started to realize like when I'm watching the movie, there generally is another movie in my head that will pop up at some point. They'll be like, oh, I kind of want to watch this now because of this movie. And sometimes it's a good reason. Sometimes it's for a bad reason. But the one in this movie, while I was watching it, that it kept coming up, that being like, I haven't seen that in a while. I really want to watch it again, is Man from U.N.C.L.E. And it has similar themes-ish. It's set in a very different time period, obviously in a different area. Obviously shares Alicia Vikander. But I love that movie so much. Like, to me, that's a type of action. Like, Ambulance is a specific type of action, and I love it. And it's one of, the great cinematic contributions. But Man from U.N.C.L.E. is, I guess, more on the line of like James Bondy kind of type action. And I love it. And I thought, I know Armie Hammer is, we don't say nice things about him anymore, but I thought him and Henry Cavill were really great together. I liked Alicia Vikander in that one. I think that they gave her and, oh, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the other actress, but she was in Tenet. I think that all of them were given such... Elizabeth Debicki, thank you. Like, I think they were all given such great roles. They're all amazing performers. It looked gorgeous, that movie. I think it's a stunning film, like, in terms of their costume and just the set dressing and everything like that. So Man from U.N.C.L.E. is my pick.
I am so crushed that we will never get the franchise that movie deserved.
I know.
But I will say I did watch Guy Ritchie's new movie this year, Operation Fortune, and yes, it's not a period piece. It feels very similar to Man from U.N.C.L.E. So if you like that movie, you'll probably like Operation Fortune.
I need to check that out. Anytime I see Hugh Grant doing like a more northern or like a more like East London type accent, anything about like besides his
too.
Yeah, like anything that he does that isn't his posh little London accent, I love. Like, I'm sold. I'm in for that movie. And the fact that he's playing a bad guy. He played a bad guy in, what was the other Guy Ritchie movie that had
The Gentleman?
Sorry?
Also, The Gentleman, and also an excellent movie.
That was with Henry Golding, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Guy Ritchie's got his own. He's another type of action movie. Like, he's a good guy.
My double bill pairing is Heat. Might as well keep it simple. Like, I watched this movie and I was like, man, this feels like the Aussie Heat, and confused Rachel there. But yeah, it was very similar to the point where JR carries around a little portrait of his, wish board or whatever, and it has James Caan on it, who is a Michael Mann favorite. So yeah, this is very similar to Heat, so I'm gonna keep it simple there. Obviously, Heat's the best crime thriller probably ever, and yeah. Now let's move on.
You think Heat? Sorry, you think Heat is the best crime thriller ever? Interesting.
Yes, probably.
I'm trying to think if there's one better. I'm trying to think. I've never
more than Usual Suspects.
Yeah.
Yes, they're very different though. They're very different. Like, I'm talking more about like the action element. If we're talking like an action
like Seven
thriller.
Oh,
that's also not really actiony though.
Yeah. Like an action.
Like that Seven, I would call a psychological thriller, and like obviously that's one of the greatest of all time.
What about the Italian Job?
It's okay. They're both fun and both very cheesy. Let us move on though to our Would You Rather. So Simon, I'd like you to go first. What is your Would You Rather for us?
Okay, so my Would You Rather, there's a in the first part of the movie, JR's goes into prison, which is pretty much my nightmare anyway. I'm a claustrophobic introvert, so being locked in a space with lots of people is like my nightmare. And then he saves his buddy from getting physically, sexually assaulted and gets put into solitary for a while. And so my Would You Rather is, would you rather go to an open prison for 10 years or solitary confinement for 1 year?
Oh, this is easy for me.
If you could choose your poison, your sentence, what would you do?
I would do solitary confinement for 1 year.
So you don't see anyone, no human contact.
Absolutely fine. I'd be fine with that. I'd be absolutely fine with that.
Oh,
just 1 year hanging out on my own. Yeah, I could do that. I would do that, no problem.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Like, would you still have access to things like books in solitary confinement, like you do in a normal prison system?
I don't think they get books in solitary confinement, do they? I thought literally like you're just in a cell, like with nothing else. Or is that just the
That's a good
movies?
question.
Am I just thinking of the movie?
I think they allow you books, like or maybe a limited run, but only Twilight. Like so that's it. And someone can sneak you in 50 Shades if you really just want to up the pressure level of how terrible it is. Let's say you can have a limited supply of books, like you've got 10 books for the whole year.
That's such a cakewalk for me. 10 books in 1 year. I'm good.
I would probably choose solitary, but I would do so on the basis of avoiding the horrors of general population prison, because I am not a very strong person. I've never been in a fight before, so I doubt I would handle the social pressures very well. So in that sense, I would take the solitary confinement in order to just do my time and keep your head down and get it out of there as soon as possible.
That's a good plan.
Yeah, Simon, what about you?
Yeah, solitary all the way. Right, like no problem. I'm very much with Rachel on this one. I would probably ask, what do I need to do to be put in solitary? But yeah, I would be terrible. Really, you know that part in Shawshank where they all bet on which prisoner's going to break on the way in, like which one. And there's one guy is like, I shouldn't be here. It's wrong. That would be me. Like within an hour of being in prison, I don't think I would be capable whatsoever in a general prison. So solitary completely.
All right, Rachel, what about you? What's your would you rather?
Okay. So because I said that, all I could think about watching the movie was the fact that I thought that the guy playing JR was a Beckham kid.
Beckham.
Okay. So my would you rather is, would you rather be David Beckham and Victoria Beckham's kid, but be an actor? Or do you want to be Ewan McGregor's kid, but be like a football player?
Oh, interesting.
The life of David Beckham's kid seems pretty amazing.
Is it though? Have you seen his oldest kid come up with those like weird photography books? Like,
no? What?
Oh, you guys don't know what this?
What? This is new information.
His oldest kid is like so wayward, doesn't know, I suppose partly because you grow up that wealthy and that kind of inherently famous. So he just tried like a bunch of different careers and he settled on being a photographer. And he has a book and you should find clips of it online because it is hilarious. Highly recommend it.
I will seek that out.
I would still pick being a Beckham kid because, I don't know, that seems like a pretty comfortable life for me.
Well, McGregor's, like, he's doing well. That would be a comfortable life, too.
Yeah. But if you're talking about which life you're probably going to be more comfortable in, it's probably going to be
that's true.
A Beckham kid.
Yeah.
And if you're McGregor's kid, your new stepmom is Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would work.
Simon, which one would you choose?
No, I think, well, the thing about David Beckham is that he won God's lottery when it comes to looks, but because the universe is in balance, he has the voice of a 13-year-old. So I would want to be Beckham's kid to inherit those genes of how ridiculously good looking he has always been and still is. But maybe that another roll of the dice would give me an actual proper adult male voice. So I would want to be Beckham's kid for sure.
Nice. Rachel?
Can you imagine looking like that? The power you would have looking like that. Amazing.
Yeah. Again, I point to his oldest kid. Kind of looks like David Beckham, but not really. Not really.
So what is your actual answer then?
Me, I would go, I'd rather be Ewan McGregor's kid, just on the basis that I would rather be an athlete than an actor.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so my would you rather question is, if you were a thief, would you rather steal art or steal solid gold bricks? Both things are difficult to fence, otherwise known as reselling on the black market. So what would you choose, Simon?
I'd be a terrible thief. It would be art because I like it. I would keep it. I'd be broke all the time because I wouldn't be able to sell anything that I steal. Have you seen that Willem Dafoe movie Inside, where he gets trapped in a New York apartment with just a lot of art and then goes crazy just looking at all the art? Have you seen that? Came
I haven't
out
seen it yet. No.
months ago. It's just Willem. If you're interested in Willem Dafoe going crazy in front of art, then that's your film. So I am definitely in a period in my life where I am reacting to art, like visual art, a lot more, and I would steal it for sure, but I wouldn't sell it. I'd be terrible. I'd want to keep it all. And it's also practically, gold makes much more practical sense because it's a lot smaller. You can sneak it out in a bag or a suitcase. And carrying out a massive piece of art is just practically very, very difficult. So I wouldn't be a great thief.
Rachel, what about you?
I would go for the gold. I don't art. I'm not good at art. I don't really get it. I'm not one for the art. And so I would never know what to look for. I would never know. Like I just feel like I'd be really out of my depth with that. Whereas gold, that's in my wheelhouse. It's just gold. I got gold. I can deal with that. And yeah, it is hard. It is hard defense, isn't it? But I'd still go for gold. I always go for gold. What about you, Dakota?
Interesting. When society completely collapses, there will be nothing of value. Money will have no value anymore, but gold will probably still hold its value. In times of conflict, gold prices always go up for some insane reason. So in that case, I would choose gold.
Wow, that's a very sensible plan for the end of society as we know it by hoarding gold. I don't know where you live, but I'm going to make a beeline for you when it all crashes down because I feel like you've got this way more figured out than I do.
Do not look under my mattress.
Oh, now you tell me. too late.
Damn. Okay. Well, I'm in North Van, so I'm not too far from you there, Simon.
Oh, you're okay.
I think this is the perfect place to wrap up the show. Simon, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you and your work, and is there anything that you want to promote?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on and to speak to you both. I've really, really enjoyed it. You can find me intermittently on Twitter. My handle's Temporary Pen. You can listen to me every Sunday on the Awesome Friday. Well, if I could say it, that would be amazing. the Awesome Friday podcast. And listen to all of our other episodes as well. And what would I like to promote? I would like to promote a better arts education in schools because creative skills are necessary for all people, especially children. That's what I would like to promote. But you can find me on Twitter, find me on Awesome Friday. And this is how I talk about films all the time. So if you like someone who with no filter, who is very emotional and would gladly talk about ambulance for the next 3 hours or Speed, then I'm your man.
Throw Constantine in there too. That's great, man.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Rachel, what have you been working on and where can people find you?
As always, you go to rachelkh.com. I'm on Twitter at _RachelKH. In terms of what you can go check out, it is, I think when this goes out, it's going to be National Canadian Film Day. I should know what that is. The actual, anyways, it's on the 19th. And at the Asian Cut, we are putting on a little interview series where we interviewed 5 Asian Canadian filmmakers and talked to them about their new projects and where they see Canadian cinema going and the Canadian film industry in general. So go check that out because it should be good. It is good, not should be good. It is good. It's good.
Hopefully that is up by the time this comes out, and I can link to that in the show notes. So yeah,
I think it will.
Once again, thank you so much, Simon. Really appreciate you coming on. You can follow
Simon.
this show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at contrazoompod. If you have seen Son of a Gun, which we didn't talk about, it is an objectively pretty terrible movie name. Let us know your thoughts. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.